I'm Kalle Persson. I'm a development director at iZettle. Before I start, there's something we need to talk about. There's something embarrassing that I need to admit to you guys. So yeah, I might just as well come out and say it. I've never written a single line of code in my life, just so you know. So it could be quite intimidating to stand here in front of a crowd of engineers. Luckily, I'm not going to talk about engineering, but I am going to talk about leadership. And Per kind of stole my quote out. I'm going to talk about decentralization. My mic's kind of on and off, right? Yeah. Hör ni mig? So, do we? Oh shit. Yeah. Yeah. Old school. Green means sound. Yes. Yeah, and I'm not used to speaking in a microphone either, so let's see how this goes. Yeah, so decentralization in practice. I'm going to talk about how we ran a tech organization of around 100 people with one formal manager. And specifically, I'm going to talk about how we built our people organization from scratch. And before that, my shout-outs. So first of all, props to the guys at Spotify for hosting. And not only for that, but also for everything that you've shared about your way of working throughout the years. Who's here from Spotify? I've stolen so much from you guys, I'm ashamed. I've stolen more than Ocean 11 from you guys. So thank you. Yeah, and the other guy, someone in the audience. Without him, we would not be here. So with the heart of an elephant and the energy of an electric eel, the father, the handsome devil and father of our meetup. Thank you, Mark. Give it up for Mark, please. Again. Yeah, and back to the topic. Per spoke about why we're here, right? But why am I here? What's important to me about this subject? And here's a quote that pretty much sums it up. There will be more kind of cheesy quotes along the way, just so you know. I mean, this seems kind of obvious to us, right? But I was a consultant for 15 years. Another kind of admission of guilt here. And I've seen a lot of companies spend a great deal of money hiring smart people, only to treat them like crap once they're in the building. Anyone here experienced this, or am I totally alone about this? Some like murmur of confirmation here. I think this is an enormous waste of human potential. It pisses me off still, 15 years later. So what I want, well, I believe that if we give people the freedom to do what they're good at without stopping them with bureaucracy, and if we trust everyone to learn and to contribute to the best of their ability, without management constantly looking over their shoulder, we will be more motivated, we will do better work, and in the end develop a better product. So that's my motivation around this. And often when I speak about decentralized or flat organizations, I run into a misunderstanding that I kind of want to clear up here before we even begin, which is that flat means lack of structure, or that the alternative to hierarchy is laissez-faire. To me, that's very far from the case. It's about kind of pointing to the things in our organization that hold us back, and then finding a better way. So when we change things, we need to be even more explicit about structure. What are we changing into? And we're still going to need to answer questions. You know, however flat we are, we still need to answer questions like, you know, how do we choose leaders? If we're going to move away from managers appointing managers, how do we choose leaders? What does a leader do if we move away from command and control and telling people what to do? How do we evaluate performance when we move away from smelly things like stack ranking and annual performance reviews? How do we drive change when we move away from, you know, the big bang annual reorg? And how do we take decisions when the boss doesn't tell you what to do? So I'm going to try to give you practical examples of how all these things can work in a decentralized organization in less than an hour. We're actually kind of exactly 1 hour if I stick to the script. It's a lot to cover, obviously. So this is kind of going to be a motorcycle ride through a museum. You're going to get quick glimpses of things, but we're not going to stop and gaze. So yeah, I hope that you'll find some inspiration in our stories. So, you know, buckle up, put on your helmets, and let's go. Right, so we begin by traveling back in time, all the way to 2015. We were in a good spot in many ways back in 2015. We kind of finally was getting our development organization in order with a great deal of help from the Spotify model. That's not a model. We were launching countries, building card readers, shipping features. We were getting shit done. But we'd basically at the same time, we'd grown from a few guys around the desk, and yes, only guys, to around 60 people in the tech organization. And the people organization, the other side of the matrix, had fallen behind. So we kind of had a gnawing feeling that this is not going to work. This is not going to scale. We felt that people were not getting the attention that they needed. We needed to change something. And at the same time, we wanted to keep what was awesome. So the drive, the helpfulness, the freedom under responsibility, the almost instinctive fear of bureaucracy. Every time I tried to talk about Scrum during the first years, people were like, "This is turning into Ericsson, man." So that was kind of the level of it. So we had part of our culture that we wanted to keep. The things that got us to where we were. We didn't want to lose our soul. So what to do? You know, in many cases, this is the time where managers go off and they come up with a solution and they come back and they hit the organization in the head with it. So we were lazier than that. So we instead decided to take the problem to the developers. And this is basically what we said. Like, we don't feel that we can give you enough attention anymore. We need to make sure that you have what you need to be happy, motivated, and productive at work. So we brought everyone together, all these 60 people in smaller groups, and we talked about, you know, number one, do you see the same thing? So just to check that they saw the same problem, and invite them to help find the solution. What is it that you need that we need to provide you with? And fortunately, it turned out that we weren't totally tripping. People seemed to feel that something was needed. No one was sure kind of what and how and so on. So we started to talk about the new role. And we heard some things come out very clearly in those conversations, which is they wanted someone who cared for them, someone who listened to them, someone who helped them forward. And at the same time, we picked up that most people did not want anything like a traditional manager. So they didn't need anyone to tell them what to do. We'd come so far without that. And, you know, no one wanted a salary to be a part of the responsibility? No one. Well, actually, when I remember, there's one guy, but I think he also wanted to be a manager. So what did I learn from this process? Well, basically, like, start with a problem, and check if other people see it too, and then let people contribute to the solution. Or you might come up with a solution to a problem that no one else sees, or a solution that people really don't like. Fairly simple, right? How many times do people forget this? Right, so bravely onwards. So now we come to the topic of choosing leaders, and I'm going to give you examples of how you can do that without having managers appointing managers. So this is the first example of sociocracy. Just to be clear, this is not going to be a lecture on sociocracy. I'm going to give examples, but I'm not going to explain sociocracy. There will be tips about who can do that. Right, so based on the need that we'd picked up, we'd created a role called chapter coach. I'm almost ashamed to say the title because it's so obviously stolen again. So kind of going back, I wish we'd call it a unicorn or something, just so people had to ask, what the hell does this mean? Because people tended to look at what Spotify meant with chapter lead and then think it was the same thing. But anyway, it was basically the same kind of supporting role, one for each, or actually multiple, for each competence group, so iOS, Android, web, backend, and test, and so on. So we wanted to find the right people, and how do managers do that? We let people apply, and then we choose, because if we let them choose, how do we know they choose the right person? So, looking back, this is absolutely nothing to do with the principle of decentralization. Absolutely nothing. So, luckily, the organization kept growing. So we got a second chance. We needed more chapter coaches, and this time we did it differently. And we have this guy to thank for it. This is Mikael Göte from CRISP. He's awesome. He introduced me to Sociocracy, and he's had his fingers in almost everything I'm going to talk about tonight. This is where I pitch agile people in October as well. James Priest will be there, and Bonita Roy, and a lot of cool people. So I promised to do that, and now I've done that. So we tried role selection, a pattern that's from Sociocracy, and it's fairly simple. Like, you gather everyone who's affected by a decision, the decision of choosing a leader or a coach. You let people nominate who they think would be best for the position, sharing their reasons for the nomination as well, and then collectively deciding what the best choice is. So in this case, we were choosing new coaches for the backend chapter. So we crammed about 25 backend developers into a conference room without windows, with fluorescent lights. And the air was hot and humid before the door even closed, so it had all the charm of a Latin American police station. And the developers were kind of restless after 5 minutes before we even started. What the hell are the agile guys up to now? And I was kind of getting a bit sweaty about the entire thing, and I watched Michael do the introductions and so on. And then the nominations began. So people started sharing the reasons why they were nominating someone in the room. And they started saying the most wonderful things about each other. Several people got very heartwarming nominations. And, I'm getting old and sentimental. So I was really touched by the sincerity that came out during this session. So we heard people's nominations, clever people who wanted bailout, like I don't have the time to do this, or no, I really don't want to. And in a little more than an hour, the group actually came to a decision on who these people were going to be, who the new chapter coaches were going to be. And I learned a few things as well. The first of the things that came out was you really bring out the wisdom of the crowd. You get several different perspectives on who's the best person for the job. And the second thing, it contributes a lot to trust, because suddenly people start to know how they're appreciated by others. Even the people who are not selected for the role get positive feedback. And imagine how it feels to be the guy who's selected, or girl. Knowing that you have the entire group behind your back from day one. They choose you. No one else did. There's usually a couple of questions here, like why don't we ask people to volunteer? Well, because the fact that you want to do it doesn't mean that you're good at it. So that's the reason for that. Second question usually is why don't we just have a vote? Well, because we might elect some ginger narcissist who half the group loves and half the group hates, right? Yeah, so that's an example of role selection. So we've chosen people for the role, and we had some vague notion about what people wanted from them. But we felt we needed a better understanding of kind of what need we serve. What is this actually about? What do we do for people? So we eloped to the archipelago for 2 days. Chapter coaches, CTO, and so on, to clarify the role and do some other stuff. And kind of starting from the needs. Not starting from our understanding, but from the needs that we'd picked up when we talked to people. It's funny because I look happier than a cat who's eaten a canary in this picture. But this was frustrating as hell. It was an awful day at work. At times we had no idea what the point was. You know, why are we even talking about this? Can't we just go and do it? Whatever it is that we're going to do, that we don't know exactly what it is. And at times it got so tedious that everyone under 30 kind of just zoned out and started playing Candy Crush instead. We did a retro at the end of the offsite. And this session, or the sessions that were connected to the role description, got by far the worst evaluation of everything we did. By far. But when we got back, this was what we had most use for. Because now we had a shared understanding about what needs do we actually serve. What is this role and what is it not? And I'm not going to go through the entire thing, but there are a few things that I find interesting enough to point out here. It's like developing people. I don't like that phrasing because it sounds like I'm here and I'm going to develop you now. But what this was about was basically creating the support structure that people needed to develop. So people around them, communities, resources, and so on. And that's something that we see in every organization. But the next thing I think, I've never heard it phrased like this at least, and it's being a buddy. That was the first thing that we prioritized about this role, meaning that everyone at work should have someone that they feel safe turning to, even when things feel difficult. Everyone should have someone who cares for them. Because we kind of we take that for granted that everyone has that, and it's not true. So that's the first thing. Make sure that people have what they need to be happy at work. And care goes a long way here. You don't need to be a skilled coach to care for people. So this was more about being than doing. Being a buddy. And the second thing that I want to point out here is like being a role model, because now you don't have authority. We did not put any authority into this role, but you're still on stage. You were selected, which means that you influence the culture whether you like it or not, which is also back to values more than what you know and competence and so on. It's about who you are and how you express values at work. Also, like, as we didn't add any authority to this role, there had to be a social contract. I mean, you couldn't boss people around to say, I'm going to coach you now. You had to be there and let people see, like, this is what I can do for you. These are kind of the services that I'm offering, and what's most important to you. So it's we begin from a servant leadership perspective. We also spoke about putting a time limit on the role, basically saying that we'll have an evaluation date for every chapter coach, so it's not a lifetime thing. We didn't really end up putting a time limit on it, and the only reason for that was we didn't know how much time it will take to be good at this. But we also wanted it to be a role that you can move in and out of, because if you compare that to a traditional manager, what's the odds once you get promoted to be a manager that you step back, that you say, I'm not good at this. I'm a crap manager. I should not be doing this. Whereas if it's not, you haven't gotten any formal authority, it's not connected to your salary, then it's easier for you to say, this is not for me anymore. Okay, so we have chapter coaches, and we know a little more about the needs that they serve. Yeah, so now we have them, right? Yeah, but I have terribly bad news. I love this quote. Becoming a manager is not a promotion, it's a lateral move onto a parallel track. You're back at junior level in many key skills. I'm guessing that many of you are developers, correct? Or have a background as developers. Some of you are even great developers, I'm guessing. Think of the countless hours that you spent honing your craft. How much work and how much dedication did it take to get that good at what you do? My question is, why would leadership skills be any different? So most of the people in the chapter coach role, we'd put them back at square one. Which sounds like setting up for an epic fail. But looking back, it had its advantages, which was, number one, they did not kind of fall back on their previous ideas about what leadership was. It was something that we created together. And the second thing that everyone knew they needed to learn. So to give them a bit better conditions, we designed a training program including a breakthrough plan for every individual, stating what they felt was most important to develop in terms of skills and being. Body coaching, where they could share experiences with other people in the coach role, and a bi-weekly learning lab, where we did everything from like, how do you actually run one-on-ones? How do you establish a trusting relationship, to building communities of practice, working with your chapter and so on. Again, back to the servant leadership, like what do we need to learn to give the best service that we can to the people in our chapter? Right, so we've even, we have the people and we know what they're supposed to do and we've taught them some stuff. So we come to the next question. How do we evaluate performance? Performance review. Feedback. These are not words that usually make people smile. someone told me that people react to the word feedback the same way they react to being threatened with a gun. Probably because the word often means being slagged by your boss. What if I told you that there's a really simple way to be love-bombed and nurtured by some of the people that you respect the most in less than an hour? This is my used car salesman pitch for the effectiveness review. So what's that? The effectiveness review is basically turning the performance review on its head. If you want feedback, go ask for feedback. Invite the people that you want it from and someone who can help you facilitate. So it puts you in the driver's seat of your development, really. So you invite people, you tell them about which role you want to be evaluated in. Is it as a chapter coach, as a developer, as, you know, not as a human. We're talking about a role here and how you're performing in it. And then you start by collecting appreciations. So you go around the table and people get to think for a few minutes about what do I appreciate about working with you. And then we go around again and we collect improvement suggestions, which basically is feed forward. Suggestions for how you can be even better at what you do. And then we co-create a development plan. So the person who's the protagonist of the effectiveness review writes down a few points about this I'm going to do differently. I'm going to do more of that and less of that and so on. And then you consent to that in the group. So the group decides if this is a good plan or not. Consent will be back to very shortly. Yeah, so it's easy as pie as a format, really. And for the same sentimental reasons as earlier, I love facilitating this. I had an effectiveness review for Gonzalo, this guy who has the most impressive beard at iZettle. I'm pretty sure that birds live in there. And it was his first one, and you kind of felt the tension because we all have this idea about what feedback usually is, which is hearing what you're bad at. And again, this kept on until the appreciations started. And then the tension in the room was released and people started laughing and so on. So, you know, the atmosphere once it came to improvement suggestions was kind of really pleasant. There's no more fear in the room. And I kind of would see people getting more appreciations in half an hour of effectiveness review than they normally would get in months at work. Which in turn makes me kind of question why we don't give each other more love at work. It's something that blows my mind, why we keep talking about problems but not what we appreciate. Really simple, really powerful format. Okay, so that's about evaluating performance. Next thing is, how do we drive change? How do we drive change when there's no manager who comes around and tells us what we're supposed to change and how? And we wanted to basically use the same process as we use for developing products, like small, safe experiments rather than big bangs and reorgs and so on. So we tried some other concepts from S3, navigating by tension and drivers and proposals and stuff. So I'll give you an example of that. The chapter coaches also had the responsibility of looking at the entire organization and see what can we improve? How can we make life better for people at iZettle? And everyone did their homework before. And rather than bringing solutions, you were asked to bring a description of the situation and what you think is needed. That's a driver in S3, for example. So like, yeah, many people have requests for phones and laptops. We need clear rules for, you know, when you can get new stuff. So it's kind of doing organizational change like you do user stories. It's really simple that way. So you start with the who and you start with the why, and then you look at the what and the how together. So we did kind of a normal prioritization, and we put, which things are easy to fix, which things are hard to fix, and what do we get most out of fixing. And then we work together on solutions. Excuse the French. So basically co-creating solutions for the problems that we had identified, everything from policies on hardware to employee surveys and how they work. So we can very quickly go from a shared understanding of a problem and a situation to working together on a proposal or a solution. But how do we then decide? Once we have these ideas and we have these suggestions of improvements, how do we decide what to do? And that's my segue into how do you take decisions? Using consent decision making. This one blew my mind when I tried it the first time. So consent means doing things in the absence of reason not to. So to give you a silly example, instead of asking, would you like pad thai for lunch? I go, do you have any objections to having pad thai for lunch? And I look for objections instead of looking for agreement. I look for reasons why this is not good enough for now or safe enough to try. So someone might say, I'm allergic to peanuts and pad thai would kill me, which sounds like a reasonable objection. And it's hard to explain how much simpler it is to come to an actual decision by asking for objections instead of asking for agreement, as we do on consensus. So why is this better than just the boss decides? Well, you know how hierarchy can lead to politics. Often it leads to less transparency because everyone is trying to get the right decision from the boss. Why not consensus? Well, it takes a really mature team to handle consensus well. It can really lead to kind of argument by attrition. We had a team where 2 people usually went on debating for so long that they did not notice that everyone else left, which is fascinating. Third question, why not vote? I told you already. You know this. Actually, not the same reason here, but when you have a new idea, you're never in majority, right? By definition. So majority decisions will favor the status quo. It will not favor doing something new. And we want to innovate, right? What happens when you reduce the pain of taking decisions? Well, it becomes easier to try new things. And trying new things is kind of what we work with, right? So it seems like a good idea. So these have been some practical examples about how we choose leaders, what we need from those leaders, or how we get to a point where we understand what people want from their leaders, how we can evaluate performance through the effectiveness reviews, and in the same kind of motion, make feedback more enjoyable. I've spoken a little about how we drive change and how we take decisions. This guy, this is James Priest. He's one of the masterminds of Sociocracy 3.0. I call it S3 because everything with a 3.0 at the end sounds shady. Is also one of the sneakiest facilitators I've ever met. He made me stand in a circle and hold hands with people without me even noticing what I was doing. And I normally have a deadly allergy to everything hippie, so that was quite a feat. You should really listen to this guy if you get an opportunity. He comes here every once in a while, doing courses at CRISP or speaking at conferences. Right, so to wrap up, some personal observations, and this is my time to rant. And these are things I've been thinking about during the entire time that we've tried out these patterns and just observations that I've made. This is the first thing. Culture eats process for breakfast. If your culture is crap, no manner of framework will help you. If there's no trust, then things will be very, very, very much harder. And I think one thing we don't speak a lot about in like an agile context is that it's important to confront negative behavior quickly if we want to stay decentralized. Because free riding and negative attitudes or simply being an old school asshole has much more serious effects on a team than we can imagine. So look for those things and do not accept them. Because if you're silent, you consent. And even more importantly to me is speak about the things that you appreciate about your culture. When you see people behave in a way that you appreciate, speak out, because we do all too seldomly. Yeah. It starts with you. It really does. You can't develop your leadership without developing yourself. And this is kind of true regardless of what role you have, whether you're a formal manager or if you're not. Because decentralization does not work without personal leadership. It just doesn't. And that means not only doing your job well, but taking care of the people around you, making sure that their voices are heard, making sure that you respect them at work, make sure that you appreciate them for what they do. And especially for you managers, like out there, you are constantly on stage. And if you say one thing and do another, people will smell it in no time. So, if you're talking about empowerment and then ordering people around at the same time, it will not end well. Yeah, and it's not only about what you do. Remember, it's about who you are at work. Dare to be yourself. Don't pretend to be someone else. Unless you're an asshole, then you should probably pretend to be someone else. And yeah, the third thing that I've been thinking about a lot is driving organizational change as experiments. Like, why would this be different than how we develop products, really? Like, agile product development is built on experimentation. We develop something small, and then we release it, and we learn from it, and we fail a lot, and we improve, and then we rinse and repeat. And we probe and sense and respond, to speak complexity theory. But when it comes to organizational change, and not on a team level, but on a larger scale, it seems that we're still stuck in the mindset of yearly releases. Every second year a big reorg hits us like a falling piano in a cartoon. I'd like us to see organizations as something organic and constantly changing. I'm preaching to the choir here, but this is my time, so I can do that. There still seems to be more focus on control and fear of failure when it comes to organizational change than product development for some reason. And a constant belief that the last big bang reorg was the last one. We'll eventually reach a stable state and never need to change again. So we've had scientific management, and I don't think it serves its purpose anymore. So I think it's time for us to create a scientific management for our era, one built on the world as it looks today, and one that embraces complexity. And working with science also means embracing ignorance and failure, because without ignorance there can be no learning. And we can never create something new without risking failure. So experiment and make sure that when you do organizational changes, that you can roll them back, just like you do with product development. If we fail, how do we handle our failure? Right, so I'm reaching the end here. The presentation is reaching its end, and so is my time at iZettle. Next week I go on a leave of absence, during which I look forward to talking to a lot of you about what you've learned. And thank you for the opportunity to share what I've learned along the way. And Per, you said the word pompous. I'm going to up that right now. I'm going to end with my favorite poem, which happens to be about ignorance and failure. So yeah, this guy. This is incidentally exactly how I want to look when I'm old. This is Samuel Beckett. Yeah. Ever tried? Ever failed? No matter. Try again. Fail again. Fail better. Thank you for me.